Rachel stumbled through the dense forest, her breath ragged and shallow as the dying light of dusk painted the trees in eerie shades of orange and purple. Shadows stretched like gnarled fingers across the forest floor, and the crunch of leaves beneath her boots seemed deafening against the stillness. Behind her, the sound of pursuit grew louder. The low murmur of voices, the heavy thud of boots, and the occasional rustle of robes brushing against branches. The men chasing her wore hooded cloaks, their faces obscured in the dim light. They moved with an unnerving synchronicity, their chants faint but growing stronger, like the pulse of something ancient and malevolent. Rachel's heart pounded as she pushed herself forward, weaving between the trees. She clutched her side, her lungs burning, but she couldn't afford to stop. "Rosalie," she whispered to herself, the name of a fragile thread of hope that kept her moving. A root snagged her foot, and she tumbled to the ground with a cry, her hands scraping against the rough earth. Panic surged through her as she scrambled back to her feet, but her gaze caught something unusual, a narrow opening in the ground, barely visible beneath a tangle of moss and leaves. A cave. Without hesitation, Rachel dropped to her knees and wriggled into the opening, her body twisting awkwardly as she slid into the darkness. The cave was small, barely more than a hollow in the earth, but it was enough. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering as she listened for her pursuers. The voices approached closer, their chants rising and falling like a sinister melody. Rachel fumbled in her pocket, her fingers closing around the journal she had been carrying. A worn, leather-bound book filled with clues about Rosalie's last known whereabouts. Beside it, her necklace, an amulet with intricate carvings, gleamed faintly in the dim light filtering through the cave entrance. She slipped the journal and necklace beneath a pile of leaves in the corner, concealing them as best she could. The cave entrance darkened as shadowed figures approached. Rachel bit her lip, stifling a gasp as the men's voices echoed through the trees. "She's close," one of them said, his voice low and guttural. "Spread out." Rachel pressed herself further into the corner, her body trembling. Her mind raced, searching for a plan, an escape, but there was none. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She could see the faint glow of their lanterns now, flickering against the cave walls. A hand reached into the cave. Rachel froze, her breath caught in her throat. Rough fingers grasped her arm and yanked her out into the open. She screamed, kicking and thrashing, but the men's grip was ironclad. One of them muttered something in a language she didn't understand, and a hood was pulled over her head. Darkness enveloped her. "We've searched everywhere, Alec," Naomi finally said, her voice firm but weary. "Every lead, every corner of this state. There's nothing. No Rosalie, no Rachel." Alec's jaw tightened. "We're not giving up. We've missed something. We have to go back through it all." "You think I don't want to find them?" Naomi snapped, turning to face him. "I've been with you every step of the way, but we're chasing ghosts. Even that email Rachel sent. It led nowhere. Dead end." Alec sighed, the weight of the past months pressing heavily on his shoulders. The email Rachel had sent months ago, cryptic and hurried, had felt like a lifeline at the time, but it had brought them no closer to finding her or Rosalie. Still, he couldn't let go. "I made a promise to Rosalie's dad," Alec said, his voice low but resolute. "I promised I'd take care of her. That doesn't end because it's hard." Naomi exhaled sharply, her frustration evident, but she didn't argue further. As they approached a small rural bus stop, she reached for her bag. "HQ needs me back," she said. "I have other cases piling up. Call me if you find anything." Alec pulled over, the car rumbling to a stop on the gravel shoulder. Naomi stepped out, hesitating for a moment before turning back to him. "Don't get lost chasing ghosts, Alec," she said, her tone softer now. "Sometimes we have to let go." Alec didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Naomi sighed, then disappeared into the small waiting area as a distant bus rumbled toward the stop. That night, in a dimly lit motel room, Alec sat at the small desk, staring at his laptop. The email from Rachel glowed on the screen. He had read it 100 times, dissecting every word, every punctuation mark. Yet, something gnawed at him, a sense that he was missing something crucial. He leaned back, running a hand through his graying hair. "Think, Alec," he muttered. "She wouldn't send this without a reason." In a moment, his eyes narrowed. An idea sparked. Grabbing a notebook, he jotted down the odd phrasing and ran it through a cipher he had used in past cases. Minutes turned into an hour, and finally, a hidden message emerged. The gas station sat isolated under the blazing sun, its weathered pumps and faded signage baking in the desert heat. Alec pulled in, the crunch of gravel under his tires breaking the midday silence. The place seemed forgotten by time, but his instincts told him he was in the right spot. He entered the small convenience store, his footsteps loud against the worn linoleum. Behind the counter, an older clerk glanced up from a newspaper but said nothing. Alec scanned the room until his eyes landed on a wall of deposit boxes near the back. His heart raced as he approached. Box number 23, the number Rachel had hidden in her message. His hands trembled as he inserted the key code, which had been taped discreetly under the counter. The box creaked open, revealing a small device. Alec stared at it, his mind racing. Pocketing the device, Alec left the gas station in a hurry, a renewed sense of determination coursing through him. This wasn't over. Not yet. Rachel woke with a start, her body aching and her mouth dry as dust. The dim light of torches flickered across the jagged walls of an underground cave, their uneven glow casting long shadows. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Around her, a handful of other survivors sat or lay huddled against the walls, their expressions hollow. They huddled in groups, whispering urgently but inaudibly. Fear and exhaustion etched deep into their faces. Rachel's gaze darted to the figures standing watch. The robed men loomed near the entrance, their faces still obscured, their hands clutching staff adorned with strange symbols. The air was damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something metallic. Rachel tried to push down the nausea rising in her stomach as she sat up. She looked around, her voice hoarse as she croaked, "Where are we?" A wiry man in his 40s glanced at her but didn't respond. A young woman nearby shook her head, her face pale and gaunt. No one had answers, only fear. Then she approached a young man she hadn't seen before. He sat alone, staring at the ground. "Hey," Rachel said quietly, crouching beside him. Have you seen this girl?" She opened the watch, revealing the picture of Rosalie, a bright-eyed young woman with a radiant smile. The man looked at it for a long moment, then shook his head. "Sorry," he muttered. "I haven't." Rachel's heart sank, but she forced herself to try again. Over the following days, she approached others, showing them the picture in quiet moments when the robed figures weren't watching. Each time, the answer was the same. No one had seen Rosalie. Some looked at her with pity, others with indifference, but no one recognized her cousin. Days blurred into a monotony of terror. The survivors were kept in their section of the labyrinthine caves, the paths guarded by hooded figures in cult-like robes. Their silent presence was unnerving, and Rachel quickly learned not to ask questions or resist. Those who did were taken away. None returned. One by one, the survivors disappeared. Rachel counted their faces each day, and each morning, fewer remained. Whispers passed between them in the dark, hushed and frantic. No one knew what the robed figures wanted, but everyone feared the same answer. Rachel clung to a single hope: Rosalie. Somewhere in this nightmare, her cousin had to be alive. She kept the picture hidden in the back of her watch, its tiny compartment her one lifeline to sanity. The nights were the worst. Rachel lay awake, listening to the muffled footsteps and chants flying through the caves. Occasionally, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the labyrinth, shaking the walls and sending shivers down the spines of the prisoners. The robed figures moved like shadows, preparing for something, a ceremony, Rachel guessed. as she would see a few pages in the stolen journal she hid in a cave. The thought chilled her to the bone. She'd seen glimpses of it from her confined space. Glowing symbols drawn on the cave walls, strange artifacts carried in solemn procession. The pattern repeated itself. The robed figures would take someone, and the remaining survivors would huddle together, whispering prayers or weeping softly. Rachel's determination hardened with each passing day. She wouldn't end up like the others. She had to find a way out, to find Rosalie, if she was even here. Rachel made herself a promise. Whatever these monsters were preparing for, she wouldn't let them take her without a fight. She would survive. She would find Rosalie. The forest was eerily quiet as Alec followed the faint GPS signal, the handheld tracker beeping softly in the still air. The tall pines formed an oppressive canopy above him, their jagged shadows slicing through the patches of sunlight that barely reached the forest floor. The ground was uneven, roots twisting out like skeletal hands trying to trip him. Sweat clung to his brow as he pressed forward, the beeping growing louder with each step. Finally, he reached a small cave, barely visible beneath a tangle of moss and roots. Alec crouched, brushing aside the foliage to reveal the entrance. He adjusted the flashlight strapped to his wrist and slid inside, his breathing echoing faintly against the damp stone walls. The air was cooler here, carrying a faint metallic tang that set his nerves on edge. Inside the cave, his flashlight beam swept across the floor until it landed on something tucked beneath a pile of leaves. His heart quickened as he reached out and uncovered a journal and a necklace, items Rachel must have hidden here. The necklace felt cold and heavy in his hand, its intricate carvings glinting faintly in the dim light. As he examined it more closely, he noticed a small hinge. Alec pried it open, revealing a tiny GPS tracker nestled inside. Alongside the device was a small, worn photo of Rosalie, her youthful face smiling back at him. Carefully, he set the necklace aside and opened the journal, the worn leather cover creaking as he turned the pages. The first pages were filled with hurried, almost frantic handwriting, descriptions of strange occurrences, and cryptic notes. Alec's eyes widened as he flipped through more pages, finding drawings that sent a chill down his spine. One depicted a circle of hooded figures surrounding a stone altar, their hands raised in unison. Another showed a monstrous creature, all jagged limbs and hollow eyes, clawing its way out of the earth. "What is this, Rach?" Alec muttered, his voice barely a whisper in the oppressive silence. The journal grew darker as he read on. There were pages filled with symbols and what looked like spells, some of which were written in Latin. Alec squinted at the text, his Latin rusty from years of disuse, but he managed to translate fragments of the sentences, sending chills down his spine. Interspersed among the text were more drawings, ritualistic scenes, strange artifacts, and grotesque creatures that seemed to leap off the page. One passage caught his eye, written in bold letters. "Immortality comes at a price. Flesh for eternity." Beneath the text were several old photographs tucked into the binding. Alec pulled them free, holding them under the beam of his flashlight. The images showed groups of wealthy-looking men dressed in formal 19th century attire, their faces grim and proud. Each photograph seemed to capture a different group, but the expressions were the same, eerily knowing, as if they shared a terrible secret. Further into the journal, Alec found lists of dates and locations. He paused, recognizing the handwriting as Rachel's. It grew more chaotic with each page, as though she had been racing against time to record everything. The final pages were filled with maps, hastily drawn but detailed enough to mark several locations. One was circled in red, with a single word scrawled next to it: Sanctuary. Alec's hands trembled as he closed the journal, the weight of its contents sinking in. This wasn't just about Rosalie or Rachel anymore. Whatever they had uncovered, it was far bigger than he had imagined. He glanced toward the cave entrance, his resolve hardening. "I'll find you, Rachel," he said under his breath. "Both of you." With the journal secure in his bag, Alec crawled out of the cave, his heart pounding. As soon as he emerged into the open, he broke into a run, the forest blurring around him. The air felt heavier with every step, the trees seeming to close in, but he didn't care. Determination fueled his stride. He sprinted toward his car, gripping the necklace tightly in his hand. The dim light of dawn seeped into the cave through a narrow opening high above, casting eerie shadows that danced across the jagged stone walls. The faint glow illuminated the edges of the chamber, where men in dark, tattered robes stood in a tight circle, their heads bowed in prayer. Their voices were a low, rhythmic drone, chanting ancient spells in a language lost to time. Rachel lay on the cold stone floor, her arms and legs bound with thick ropes. She struggled weakly, but her strength was sapped and the effort was futile. Her head turned toward the center of the cave, where a large circular altar stood, its surface etched with intricate ancient symbols that seemed to pulsate faintly with energy. The altar appeared alive, a silent force waiting for something unspeakable. The chanting grew louder, the voices of the robed men rising in a crescendo that reverberated through the cave. The ground began to tremble, a low rumble building beneath Rachel's body. Her heart raced as she saw the center of the altar begin to shift. The symbols glowed a sickly crimson, and cracks formed along the stone, emitting an unearthly, hellish light that bathed the chamber in an unnatural glow. "No," Rachel whispered, fear choking her voice. Her body froze as the cracks widened, revealing a gaping void beneath the altar. From the darkness, a creature emerged, its body grotesque and raw, as if it had been flayed alive. Muscles and sinew gleamed wetly in the crimson light, and its eyes were empty voids, blacker than the abyss from which it crawled. The monster climbed onto the altar, its claws scraping against the stone with a sound that made Rachel's skin crawl. Its head twisted unnaturally as it scanned the room, a guttural growl escaping its maw. The chanting reached a fever pitch as the creature turned its attention to Rachel, moving toward her with deliberate, horrifying slowness. Rachel's breath came in short, panicked gasps as the creature loomed over her. Its claws extended, dripping with blood that seemed to come from nowhere. It lowered itself, its twisted form towering over her as its grotesque mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. With a sickening sound, it latched onto her, its body pulsating as it began to drain her life force. Rachel screamed, her voice a piercing echo that was swallowed by the cavern's oppressive walls. Her vision blurred as her energy ebbed away, her body growing colder with each passing second. At the same time, near the feet of the chanting cultists, ancient grails began to fill with a thick, shiny liquid, a gruesome offering born of Rachel's suffering. The grails overflowed, the elixir pooling at their feet. Yet the cultists remained motionless, their chants unwavering. The monster's growls mingled with Rachel's fading cries, the ritual reaching its horrifying climax. The cave seemed so alive, the walls trembling as if in anticipation of something even darker yet to come. Rachel's vision dimmed, but her mind clung desperately to a single thought. She couldn't give up, not before she sees Rosalie for the last time. But her body resisted, tired, her hands tied in an unbreakable knot. The creature's claws tightened around her, and the altar beneath her seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her weakening heartbeat. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the cavern, Rachel felt her consciousness slipping away, the nightmare swallowing her whole. Alec sped down the narrow, winding road, the tires skidding slightly as he pushed the limits of its speed. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and his eyes darted between the maps spread across the passenger seat and the road ahead. The journal's marked locations haunted him, but he had chosen the closest one, praying it was the right place. "Don't let me be too late," he muttered under his breath, the desperation in his voice palpable. As he neared the mountain, Alec spotted the cave entrance from a distance. Two hooded figures stood guard, their forms silhouetted against the faint glow of dawn. He knew waiting for Naomi and reinforcements wasn't an option. Rachel's life depended on him acting now. He parked the car a safe distance away and grabbed his backpack, scanning the mountainside. His eyes caught a narrow, rocky path that seemed to wind upward. Slinging the pack over his shoulder, he began climbing, the rough terrain scraping at his hands and boots. The higher he went, the louder the sounds became, a mix of guttural roars and rhythmic chanting that made his skin crawl. At the top, Alec found a secondary entrance, a narrow opening concealed by boulders. The chanting echoed from within, growing louder as he squeezed through the tight space and descended into the labyrinth. The air was stifling, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of smoke from the torches lining the walls. The roars reverberated, each one sending a shiver down his spine. Alec pressed on, his flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. When he reached the main chamber, the sight stopped him cold. At the center of a massive stone altar, a monster loomed. Its grotesque form was raw and glistening, as though its flesh had been stripped away. Its hollow eyes burned with rage as it let out another deafening roar. Around the altar, the hooded cultists chanted in unison, their hands raised toward the creature as if in worship. The altar's symbols glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the chants. Rachel lay tied at the edge of the altar, her body motionless. Alec's heart lurched. He had no time to think, no time to plan. His hand dove into his backpack, pulling out 2 smoke grenades. Without hesitation, he yanked the pins and hurled them onto the altar. The grenades exploded in a thick, choking cloud of smoke, sending the cultists into chaos. "Rachel!" Alec shouted, sprinting forward as the chamber erupted into shouts and confusion. He reached her side, his hands fumbling with the ropes binding her wrists and ankles. Rachel's eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused but alive. "Alec," she whispered weakly, her voice barely audible over the noise. "I've got you," Alec said, his voice firm despite the panic pounding in his chest. He lifted her into his arms, her weight light against him as he turned toward the far wall where an opening gaped into darkness. The monster roared behind them, its rage shaking the ground as the altar's cracks began to seal. The ritual had been interrupted, and the creature was turning its fury on the worshippers. Alec glanced back as he carried Rachel. The monster's claws tore through the air, grabbing several of the robed figures and dragging them into the void that was closing beneath it. The followers' screams mingled with the creature's guttural snarls. Amid the chaos, Alec saw one member clutching a grail, its contents glowing faintly as he slipped away into the shadows. "No time," Alec muttered to himself, focusing on the escape. He stumbled through the opening in the cave wall, the distant sounds of the monster's rage echoing behind him. The morning light outside felt blinding after the oppressive darkness of the cave. Alec kept moving, his legs burning as he carried Rachel down the mountain path. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice more for himself than her. Behind them, the mountain seemed to grow silent, as though swallowing the horrors within. The dawn broke over the horizon, the first rays of sunlight casting a warm glow across their faces. The forest below stretched endlessly, bathed in hues of gold and orange. Alec gently set Rachel on her feet, his hands gripping her shoulders as he examined her with growing concern. "Rachel," he said, his voice cracking, "what's happening to you?" "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, gazing out at the sunrise. Her voice carried a bittersweet serenity. Rachel swayed slightly but managed a weak smile. Her skin, once vibrant, now seemed pale, faint lines etching across her face. Her auburn hair dulled to streaks of gray. She looked down at her hands, trembling as they grew thinner, more fragile. "I always dreamed of watching a sunrise like this with Rosalie. I just wish I had more time." Alec's throat tightened. "You're not dying, Rachel. We'll find a way to stop this. We'll find a cure." Rachel's fingers brushed over the journal tucked into Alec's pack. "She's out there, I know it. I can feel her." Her voice faltered as her knees buckled. Alec caught her, lowering her gently to the ground. Sympathetic. They sat together against the rock near the cliff's edge. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Rachel's transformation continued, her youth slipping away with every breath. Her eyes, though, clouded with age, held a quiet strength as she looked at Alec. "You have to find her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me, Alec." Rachel smiled faintly, her head leaning against Alec's shoulder as the first birds of morning began their gentle song, filling the air with a fragile sense of renewal. Her breathing slowed, her chest rising and falling with an almost imperceptible rhythm. The sunlight crept over the horizon, casting a warm golden hue on the dewy grass and illuminating the distant peaks with a fiery brilliance. The scent of pine and wildflowers lingered in the crisp morning air, mingling with the faint whispers of a waking forest. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice a fading echo. The lines of her face softened as her transformation completed, her once vibrant features now weathered with time and wisdom. Her eyes fluttered closed. Expression, serene and at peace, seemed to reflect the sunrise itself, an ending and a beginning intertwined. Alec cradled her lifeless form, his tears mingling with the cool morning breeze as he whispered her name. His voice was breaking against the silence.
Sir, the Prime Minister is ready for your meeting.